What up, everybody? Scuffy here, and we are about to do ourselves a little card-by-card action. It's time for the card-by-card reboot for the Space Wolves. Space Wolves faction were the first faction to come out of the Prospero expansion, and with them they brought the Ward and Pack mechanics. The Ward feature has now been applied to several other cards and other legions, as well as some neutral cards that allow for that to be generated, and the Pack mechanic remains exclusive to Space Wolves. How have they aged? We've had two expansions now. We're about to go into... Yeah, they came out here in Prospero. We've had the Calth expansion, and we've had the Malevolence expansion, and in 2 weeks' time, we're going to get the Angels of Caliban expansion. So, in 3 expansions, how have the Space Wolves fared? How have they updated? How worthwhile are they? What works for them still? Let's take a look, shall we? Let's take a look at the warlords. We're going to start off with Bovi Greybeard. Now, Bovi Greybeard, gosh, this guy got changed after some serious. I won't say he wasn't breaking the game. He wasn't overpowered, but there was a moment there in time where the builds were beginning to focus on troops and getting troops on the board and bolstering up your forces. And his ability that gave +1/+1 gave that to all of your troops, not just adjacent units. This is really big late game, especially if you could get like an Ornitov's Barge. At 8 energy, you hit Ornitov's Barge and buff all of those troops up. And if you only have a couple troops surviving each turn, guess what? You can do it again every turn. This is made more powerful by the fact that he can have access to troops with Ward. Because those troops then become immune to tactics, and that means that the only way that you can really get rid of those threats is by random damage. And random damage, while it can be effective, it is also not reliable. So his ability got changed. Now his battle honor is nice. That's kind of like a little thing that they threw in there. Gaining ward until the next turn is nice, but it's not huge. And there's not a lot, unless you're playing against certain factions like the Sons of Horus, or a faction that has to spend tactics like Witchfire or something like that. There's not a lot that giving ward to your warlord is going to do. Maybe late game in a pinch, but to have it as a battle honor, you've got to kill something first. And if you're playing against a mono warlord, you're not going to get that option. You're really just going to be relying on his ability. Drill Sight is still a very good card for him to have because it allows him to put out a troop or 2 troops late game and then still use his ability on curve, and that's important. But it's again just the troops adjacent to him, so it's not as widespread, it's not as effective, and it's very slow. Following that change to him, his play really tapered off. Now he still plays fairly well, but as a whole, and we'll kind of see this as we take a look at it, I think the speed of the faction itself, combined with the reduction of how his ability affects the board, really tapered on his strength. He really kind of dropped off for a variety of reasons in the game. The speed of the game, the aggro warlords of the game, really can leave him in the dust a lot easier. So, unfortunately, that's how he played out. Now, a lot of these cards that we're going to be looking at with the Space Wolves, there has not been too many changes, despite there being three releases. And I think, and I'm saying this early, preemptively, I personally think that the factions that came out in Prospero, the Space Wolves, the Thousand Sons, and the Custodes, are due for some patches, some updates at some point. So take that with a grain of salt that the information that I'm giving here may or may not change in a month or two. Hopefully, it will. But once we get a new expansion here, October 22nd, 23rd, 22nd when it's out, we might not get patches for previous legions for a while longer as they're focusing on those new cards. So that's likely. Giger's another one that kind of fell off. I've been playing him lately, as you can tell here with those practice matches. That's all play, testing, trying to check out. He's got high initiative. That's great. Early on, he was kind of the go-to. Before Bovi. Bovi was the 4th warlord added, so he became an event warlord and built up those troops that really drew a lot of attention. But for a while there, Giger was the one to use because he was the best one to use, given the card pool, given the way that Leman Russ was out of the gate. We'll talk about Leman Russ in just a second. But as time has gone on, he is not in a good place for a few reasons, and some of this is just practice and implementation. His ability can be pretty nice late game. You could arguably deal out 8 to 10 damage depending on how high you've stacked his attack, and if you've got Bloodthirst and you're able to use his ability twice. You've got to build for that, and you've got to get a little bit lucky with that. But the penalty that he has with that Berserk is so huge because he has to go Face Strike. And that's problematic because a lot of the really good Space Wolf cards are at higher energy levels, not necessarily low energy levels. So you're 6 energy, you're 5 to 8 energy roughly. And in this time, especially with Desperate Defense, if you are playing cards at that level and you don't have energy to use his ability to do that attack, you have to Face Strike with him. And that means that in order for you to play troops on curve, you might have to take 8 damage to the face. But if you don't play those troops on curve, you're still going to take 8 damage to the face because maybe you can't play anything else. It's a very bad spot for him to be in. I'd like to see this change. I think at some point it will be. Again, the selling point for him is he's got high initiative, but with counterattack added, is it really that big of a selling point? That's up for debate. I think he's okay, but again, he's dropped considerably. I don't think he's nowhere near what he once was, even though his ability has remained the same. The game itself, the game state, has really just kind of evolved to a point where he is not sitting in a good position. Now, Leman Russ got changed twice, I believe. Out the gate, he was not good. It looked like he was going to work well. He had this ability where you could pay 1 energy to give him +1/+0. And then it was either that or, you give him you pay energy to give him +1/+0, and then he could act again. That was it. So, like, you paid energy to make him an Angron, essentially. You could pay energy to give him 3 attack. You could pay energy just to give him 3 attack and sit there, like you can do now. But because of the speed of the game at that time, as well as it is now, not to mention the fact that you're paying energy just to make his attack worthwhile, just to do 1 extra damage, it was kind of weird. It didn't work out for him. It didn't play like it was intended or like people thought. His Reckoning is still kind of, it's that's a powerful Reckoning. That you get a 4 attack with Ward is just beef. He loses the can act again part with his gaining +1/+0, but sometimes you don't want to attack, you want your opponent to have to attack you. But this has always been the case where it costs 1 when both warlords are 4 or less health. And with his attack, with his ability as it was, and that Reckoning, it just didn't gel right. When they added this pack feature that can act once more, it made Rust decks really viable. It made them interesting. It gave the strategy. It's still an aggro warlord, and there's still some weakness and flaws there, but you got the sense where he's leading the pack and attacking, and there's just more there. He works well with his troops. He's the pack leader. It worked out very well. And he's still, I think since then, he's been pretty consistent around 54%, 56% win rate. He is hard to play. He is hard to play for that just fine edge. And when I say hard to play, I don't mean like he's hard to win with. I mean, like, you have to do some math. Like game, if you've got several cards in your hand, you really have to think about how you're going to play these cards out to maximize your damage. At 5 energy, you can win the game if you have the right cards in hand. With the change to Goldstone Hunters recently, making them a conditional fast card, Leman Russ loses a very nice tool. They're still effective. They can still be a fast card later in the game. You're going to have troops to throw down with them, which 50% of the time you are already doing. But it's not something that he can use early in the game to burst out. He's got to build up for that. And it's a tool that was nice to have, especially if he's got like a Wolf Claw and he's got one of the Hunters out and he can just go to town. He can still do that, but it's harder for him to do. And as more and more decks incorporate frontline, that is really a bane for him. If there's a frontline that he's got to ram face into once or twice, so it's very hard to play Russ and do it consistently. I had a great time playing him for 2 months, but at the end of the 2 months, man, I was done. I was done playing him. I just wanted to play something differently that didn't have this very thin edge where at 6 energy or 7 energy. I'm like, okay, I've got which card do I play? What order do I do? Don't forget this pack attack. Oh, okay. And now with the timer in the game as of today being sped up, I don't know if that really is helpful for us either. So just be aware of that. He's a Primarch. He's very strong, very solid. Warlord, he's got a very fluid style and synergistic style in terms of how he works with his faction. But he's not easy. He's not easy. Now, Oathor Weirdmake is another one that I like. I don't know if I've done a video on his deck. I should. I've got quite a few games there, and I've had fun with him. His ability changed a little bit before. He just had this give ward until your next turn, as well as the +0/+2. And I think that might have been +0/+1 in ward, and that cost 1 energy. Then they gave him this 2, and they made it a +0/+2, but they also added this passive, which at the end of your turn, heal 1 to a friendly unit. That used to be Tarek's ability, except Tarek's, when I say Tarek Torgadon of the Sons of Horus used to have that very similar passive ability, except it was just a friendly troop. This ability works so that it can actually heal Oathor. If Othor's the only one that has damage and you've played a couple troops and you buff him up, he's healing himself every turn. For his 30 health, he actually is a very flexible warlord. And the fact that he can boost your health and give ward is really good against, or actually say against, is just really good to bolster those already warded troops with bloodthirst, high health frontline troops, whatever you want to protect, and then really deliver the late game. And then even if you're not having a huge board, if it comes down in a pinch, especially if you're playing against something like the Sons of Horus, you just put that ward on yourself after 8 energy, and you'll never have to worry about Vengeful Spirit. That's just, like, he can use it against your troops, but he'll never be able to use it on your warlord. The Weirdmake deck I have deserves a separate video because it is all ward all the time. And there are games where you can tell how frustrating that is for the opponent. They've got 6 or 7 cards in their hand that they can't use, that they probably will never be able to use. And that's nice. That's a good feeling. He's very good. I think, despite his low health and medium initiative, he's probably your best intro to the faction as a warlord. And because he's a rare, that's nice, that's a bonus, but that's not necessarily why I'm pitching him. I think Bovi requires some understanding, and really, you've got to deal with that curve and kind of feeling behind. Giger is not in a great spot. Russ is very hard to do. I think Oathor Weirdmake is very forgiving, very beneficial, and can really help you appreciate the ward mechanic as itself, and that's just really cool. And there's some really cool troops here who can benefit from that. Sigvasti Seekers, these guys are okay with a couple of decks. Usually they're in event decks. They're not fantastic, but there's little 1 ping damage for 1 damage. That's nice, and for free they go back to your hand. Very rarely do they survive long enough to go back to your hand. That's the problem. And with Space Wolves as a whole, they really want to have troops surviving. You could play them with Oathor or Bovi and build up their health. The problem with that is, why are you building up their health if you're just going to return them to your hand? That feels like wasted energy. So, as much as I love the artwork there, I'm going to pass. I'm also going to pass on the Underverse, and I really, really, really want to like the Underverse. The Underverse is it's not the first. Warp Retreat, I believe, came out before the Underverse, but the Underverse was going to do it better. Return all your troops to the deck and reduce all their cost to 0, and then draw a card for each troop returned. That's crazy. Can you imagine? Can you imagine this card with everything that we've seen with Warp Retreat in the last month or 2 months? It's just crazy. I managed to do 1 meme deck with it and make it work for the Space Wolves. With their faction and their card specifically, it's not as everything that it's cracked up to be. It's very hard to do. It's not beneficial at all. There's no fast troops here in this deck. It's a potential late game option with some of the flank troops or trying to build a board. I love the cost of it. I love the animation that plays when you play this card. It's really cool. But you can't build a deck around it. If you're going to put the Underverse in your deck, then you should probably just... You're doing it for the memes more than you're actually doing it because it's a smart play. Because there's very few troops in here, if any, that have a rally effect or that have a fast effect. So you're handicapping yourself by taking them off the board. Now the idea is that you're healing them, getting them out for free. That's cool, but very rarely does it come out that way. It just doesn't happen that often. Thrill of the Hunt is good. This is probably better, even though it is affecting only one troop. It heals them for 2, and this is not just Astartes. This is friendly infantry as well, and it gives them stealth. That's really nice, and you often see this used with like Bloodthirst units to give them either the additional health or to hide them for a little bit longer. It's just as a one-of, it's nice to have in a deck. I like the card. You've got to build with it in mind that you're building. It works more with Othar and Bovi than it does with Russ and Fellhand, but it is a very good card. It does 2 things, and it's flexible in how it does them. So solid card. Ansvar is theoretically a nice card. Usually what he does is he draws a lot of heat. If you can give him ward, that's fantastic. If Othar can give him ward late game and then have some pack attacks, you can get a 6-7 attack Ansvar going off. Usually that's not the case. Usually you might get Ansvar up to a 4 attack, and then he takes an attack or some damage that would normally go to someone else. He's not bad. He gets very strong late game, but he's not critical to your deck. If you don't have Ansvar Grayslayers, you're not missing out. 9 times out of 10, they just become targets. But they're good targets. When they don't work, if your opponent has to spend even a turn attacking a 2 or 3 attack Ansvar, they've taken it away from your Warlord. And on top of that, if your Ansvar happens to survive, then you can do another 3 to 4, maybe even 5 on your next turn. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Canis Helix is... At first, when I first saw this, it was great because it gives ward to a friendly Astartes, as well as +2 attack, which is very nice. However, as we go through this list, you're going to see that there are just some good troops, and most of them already have ward. So the ward seems redundant. And the ones who don't have ward, if you're playing Othar, you can give them ward. Or you don't really need to give them +2 attack because you need them for a specific thing, and this 2 energy is better served off by putting down more troops, or just by bolstering the health of your troops. The attack is nice. Bolstering the attack of your troops is nice, but the Space Wolves need troops on the board, and they need to bolster their health to do that, not necessarily their attack. So while this is a nice card, I don't prefer it. The fact that it can be generated by the Wolf Spirit, as we not necessarily, Canis can't be, Curse of the Wolf, and that's probably the better card to look at. Ice and Steel is good for Bovi especially, because like I said, he runs a board, and early on that was a big thing. He could pump a board and then play Ice and Steel and pump them again. It's still good. I don't know if you put 2 of it in a deck. I go back and forth with that. Sometimes I've got 1 in there, sometimes I don't. I found, again, because it bolsters health, it's good. The attack part, not so much. I'd rather use my Warlord ability and then play a troop than play a card from hand. If you only have 1 troop on your board playing Ice and Steel, you're losing value from that. But if you play Ice and Steel, you've got 3 or 4 troops on the board, you're gaining more. You're gaining more buffs, and that's really where it's for. It's not for early game, it's more for late game. Cobra Hunters is my preferred 2 attack. Now, like I said, Ansvar is very good. It's an epic, but these guys can do something right out the gate. They work well with Russ as triggering pack because they've got flank. They've got 3 health. They're cheap. These guys are just good. You should have 2 of these in your deck. There's no reason not to. They're going to do something for you. Whether you bolster their health and they flank, whether you bolster their attack and they flank, whether you just use them to a flank attack and pack attack, whatever the case may be, Cobra Hunters will not let you down. I don't play this guy. Cigar Squad is a pass. They're 2 health. You can have 4 attack. That's fantastic. Very rarely. I think I've only seen 1 game, and it was an event game where that stuck around long enough to do anything with its 4 attack, and at that point the game was already over. Pass. Stalk the Stars is a nice card in the fact that it gives drop pod. That's cool. And you draw a card. Okay, so you're not losing anything. For 2 energy, late game, that could be very nice, giving drop pod to a warded troop or a troop with frontline, protecting them a little bit from flank attack. But it's not fantastic. It doesn't give drop pod to all the Astartes in your hand. I'm indifferent with it. I don't play with it. I've seen it in events, and at the very least, drawing a card is good. Aldrim Hunters are definitely good. They're common, but they have such huge value. They have huge value in Russ especially. These guys are almost a win condition in themselves with Russ sometimes, because if he's attacking 3 or 4 times, he's also doing 3 or 4 more damage because of these guys. And if you get 2 of these going off, then he's doing 6 to 8 more damage for 3 energy. That's huge, huge exchange. And then they draw fire and they become heat off of your warlord. So just a great comment. There's no reason not to. And they hit your enemy warlord. It's just direct. It's just direct. I really like those guys. You should have 2 of these in your deck. I don't see Bovi, not Bovi, Giger. I don't see Giger using them as often. Russ, definitely. Bovi, definitely, because he's building a board. Othar can. I opt not to, but he can. But they definitely are crucial for Russ. And the fact that they're common is nice. Curse of the Wolf, and this is the card that does 2 things for you. First off, it gives you +2/+2, so you're bolstering attack and health. And then if it dies, it goes back in your deck. Now, you don't draw a card from that. I kind of would like to see that go back into your deck and then you draw a card, so you have a chance to get it right away. Space Wolves don't have a lot of card drawing, and that's I think, an inherent balance decision. The fact that you can generate it from the Wolf Spirit card, if you're playing with that card in there, you might just want to not include Curse of the Wolf in your deck because you're going to generate that card. But if you're including just one of those, sometimes it's all it takes. If you put a Curse of the Wolf on Jortan Stalker Squad, that's powerful. And 9 times out of 10, that's why your opponent tries to get rid of Jortan Stalker Squad right away, for fear of that card. So it is feared for a reason. Now, Emperor's Executioners, here's another card. It's a shining example of the difference between the Sons of Horus and the Space Wolves and the Luna Wolves, as they once were called. The Emperor's Executioners deals 4 damage. It costs 1 less than Chariot of the Gods, but you do not get the card draw, and that is the difference. This is just a solid card. You don't get a card drop. That does suck. Early on, throwing these out there just for nothing, that's a bad decision because you're going to burn out of cards in your hand. But late game, for 6 energy, you can do 8 damage if you have two of those in the hand. In addition to whatever attacks that you've got from your warlord or troops or pack attacks, it's affordable. The fact that it is less than 4 energy is an even exchange, because really it helps you combo your cards at a later game. I wouldn't classify the Space Wolves as a combo faction. I would say that they are a mid-range faction. And that card kind of emphasizes that. They can double down and pair up with other cards, but at the very least it allows them to respond and or deal with threats as they choose, as opposed to going aggro, or as opposed to, needing 2 or 3 of these cards to really trigger. You've got warlords like Leman Russ, who are combo dependent in terms of how his troops operate, and he can go burst if he needs to. But I think most of the cards in this faction you're going to see are really mid-range, and if they have benefits both offensive and defensive depending on how you choose to play the game. Now, Horrigan Pack, these guys are okay for 3. They heal 2 at the end of your turn. I like using them with Othar and healing them and bolstering their health to a 5 or a 7 with Ward that just consistently deals 3, and they stick out there. That's okay. If they don't survive, then they're not going to do much for you, and then you've lost something from them. But if you can get their attack up to a 4/4 with Bovi, or their health up and with Ward, you can get long-term value out of them. So I think they're beneficial again for those troop warlord builds. Jortan is kind of the upgraded version. Even though he doesn't heal 2, he's got Ward automatically. He's got 4 health, and he has Bloodthirst. So at the very least, even if your opponent doesn't have any other troops on the board, they're taking 3 to their warlord, because 9 times out of 10 they're going to use their warlord to face bash. If they don't deal with the 3, they're going to still take 6 just from playing this card, if they don't have like a fast or a flanker troop, or some random damage like an artillery strike. So Jortan is probably the number 1 epic, I would say, for the faction. I would argue that Jortan's Darker Squad is just the number 1 epic to go. Definitely worth picking up on the shop. Pick him up over Ansvar for sure. You will not feel like they didn't do something for you, even if all they did was get attacked twice right out the gate. They did 6 damage, and that's important. If you can get long-term value from them by bolstering the health of them, it's just icing on the cake. Valkyrie Seekers work well with Bovi as well as Othar. they've got sneak attack. So again, we've got 4 health. We can bolster that health. And the fact that we don't have sneak attack means that we're not taking damage to the health. So here's a troop who's a perfect mid-range troop that can stay on the board and help with that board presence that the Space Wolves need. Can it work in Leman Russ? Yes, it can. Can it work in Giger? Yes, but less results there because he doesn't do anything for that troop whatsoever. I think the other 3 warlords benefit more from them, but it's a solid common. It's very good. If it lives, and if you're able to get Curse of the Wolfen on this thing, look out. Look out. Wolf Claw is not needed for a couple of the warlords. I don't have it in my Oathar, but it's a must-have for Leman Russ. It's a must-have for Giger. It's just powerful. It gives +1/+0 and Bloodthirst until your next turn. And I like this because what this also does is this gives it, even on your opponent's turn, that attack still remains. So you're still a daunting target if your opponent wants to face strike your warlord. They're going to take that additional damage. You can bolster that with Russ and make him a 4/5 on your turn against an Angron player, and they're going to be sad that they have to go up against you. Is that the best way to use the Wolf Claw? It's flexible. It's mid-range. So you see how that works. Even though it's an aggressive card, it can be used with some flexibility there, and that's a very, very strong card. Also, a good one to pick up. I don't think there's any reason not to pick that up. I don't think you would regret that. Excoriation campaign. This is just like a better, well-defined artillery strike. There's no reason between the two. I guess you could choose just to put this in there as opposed to artillery strike. The only problem being is if your opponent has purposefully or or not, I mean accidentally, played their units on one side of their warlord and they don't have a unit on both sides of the warlord, you're not going to benefit from the full value of this card, and that could be unfortunate. However, you with this, you are going to hit the units that you know that you're going to hit. So if that's what you want to do, it's a good, I don't know, basically, long story short, it's a toss-up. Do you use this? Do you use artillery strike? I prefer artillery strike for reasons. That's just me. But it's not bad. Fenris is not bad. It gets overlooked a lot, but the fact that it heals 2 to all your units and gives them all ward is really big. It's really big. Late game, ward on your whole unit is nice. You still are very vulnerable to random damage, astral warfare, defensive satellites, volcanic instability, whatever the case may be. But healing 2 puts you beyond that range normally. This also gives ward to all your units as well as your warlord. This is a good card. It's hard to squeeze in a deck sometimes, but just playing one of them is just a solid play. I wish that it drew card, but I think that would probably be just too much. I think that would just be too much. That's a good card to have, probably one of in a deck, but don't play it early on. Play it when you're going to heal to 2 to 3 units, and that could be enough to really drive home the wedge. Halvdan Baelai is awesome. This guy's awesome. He takes a lot of heat. Usually you play him and he doesn't survive because either your opponent gets lucky with a mortar strike or they've got a flanker in hand, but they still have to take 4 attack to the face either which way to deal with him because he is just that nasty. And if they don't, that's probably about good game. Unless they have a way to throw out like front lines consistently every turn to stall him, he's going to get stronger. His attack is going to get nastier. His health is still always going to be 5, sure, but that's usually enough to do the job. Oh gosh, it's hard to say. I could make an argument that he's the best legendary in the faction. They have some very good legendaries. I don't know. It's a tough. He's a tough spot, tough contender. But definitely pick him up. There's no reason not to. Pick him up and then shop. I like Ragvard Grace Slayers. I tried them out in the Giger deck. They didn't work out so well in the Giger deck. I scrapped them from that because of their cost. And again, kind of talking about how he gets penalized for those higher cost turns. But the way that you can get their attack up very high, the fact that they've got 4 health and ward, I can easily have gotten these guys up to a 7 attack with Russ, and then they attack, and then you also get to finish off with Russ. These guys are good. They're good for Rust. They're also good for Bovi, or not Bovi, Oath or Weird Make, because they've got Ward naturally as well as a high health value. Um, I like them. I like what they do. Even if you're only hidden for 3 to 4 every turn with these guys, but they're staying on the board, that's 3 or 4 every turn that your opponent has to figure out a way to deal with or prevent. Same under Rhino. I liked it at first, and I don't play it anymore. It's a 5 health front line, which is cool. It draws and strikes from my deck, which I've never used that ability for. And it's a low attack, so it can be bounced. It doesn't have ward. This just is a card. It's a common, so it makes sense that it would have these attributes as a common card should. But it feels like it lacks something. It feels like it's just lacking something for punch for the faction, especially as a faction who lacks card draw. I think this could see some change at some point. Instead of a drawn Astartes from your deck, maybe as a rally, or maybe even just generating a Astartes, a 2-cost Astartes in your hand. Something to make this more worthwhile in playing. There are very few front lines for the Space Wolves. They're all decent. Most of them are better than this. That's really what it comes down to it. Thorbrand Hunters are kind of like a higher cost version of the Aldrin Hunters, right? You got the Aldrin Hunters for 3. You've got these guys for 4. Much better on the attack stat. You don't have to worry about these guys getting bounced. Very similar ability. Health is the exact same. These guys aren't bad. Usually you see them generally because of Wolf Spirit, putting them in your hand. Wolf Spirit is a good card. Again, as a one of. And if you get this late game, you might think that that's great. You're losing a lot of momentum. If you get this early game and you play this at 4 energy, I think that's the better spot. If you can play this at 4 to 6 energy, you get better value out of this. If you're playing this at 8 to 10 energy, it's taking away from the flexibility and the options that you should be having on the board already. And then you lose that momentum, because then you're generating, not to mention, you're generating Astartes at that point that have got cost 5 or less, and maybe at that point in the game, that's not going to be enough. So having them out earlier is better than getting this card out later. This is another card that, if this is a win condition in itself. I love bolstering these guys up with Oather. Boom. 2 for 2. That's an even exchange, and then they've got this 5 health, and then they can act again, and that's really where it is. Basically, these guys are the Space Wolves Duke Mortimer, and they're a common, which is fantastic. You put down a troop. I've got 6 energy on my turn because it costs 5 to play this, so I've got 6 energy, so I can deal 6 damage to whatever troop you put down. I hope you put down a troop that has more than 6 health. Oh, you didn't? Then why put them down at all? On top of that, I can then use them to attack for 4 if I want to go that route. And if I give them ward and boost up their health, they're never going anywhere. Your opponent's got to deal with them with random damage or flankers. These guys are fantastic for Oather especially. Maybe not so much for Russ. Bovi also makes very good work of these guys. Why Bovi makes good work of these guys without ward? Because he gives them +1/+1. At 7 energy, it's later. Or even if you've got like a drill site at 5 energy, you can make these guys a 5/6. Now that 5/6 is nice because it removes them outside of the range of Ambassador Melgator, and that is a good place to be. They don't have ward still with him, but they can still work and just put down that suppression fire. So good card, very solid common. Fateful Weird is in some event decks. It's a card drawing card. It should be really cool for Space Wolves. As I said, they don't have a lot of card draw. The problem is its cost is so high. At best, you're paying 5 energy to get Survivor 3 on your Warlord. Now, because it's an epic, you can have 2 of these in your deck, but it just doesn't seem like an even exchange. If this card cost 3, and conditional 3 energy to draw 3 cards, and then for every tactic drawn, give Survivor 1 to your Warlord, this card would be phenomenal. And I think it would really change the way some of these Warlords are getting built. Giger especially. Giger would benefit from this huge. But that 5 energy just really throws it off. Even at 4, I think you'd have to change up that Survivor ratio. You can pay right now 5 energy for Manifest Destiny to get Survivor 5, and there's no chance about it. You may not be drawing cards, but there's no chance. You know what you're going to get. Otherwise, Fateful Weird is maybe you'll get Survivor, but at the very least you're drawing cards, and there's already cards that are letting you draw cards in the game, like Tissue Divinatus, Void Engagement, etc. So this card is just a no-go for me right now. If they were to change it, either change the cost, change the Survivor increase, change the cost especially. That's what I'd like to see. This card could become very good, but as it is right now, I'm going to pass, and I don't think it's worth picking up. If you get it, you get it, but there are no decks that are using this in their build that need to have it. Jortan is fantastic. This guy's a great rare. Boom, 4/5 frontline ward. You got to deal with this guy. You got to get past him. If you can't get past him, I'm going to make him stronger, or I'm just going to keep him out there, and he's going to keep you from hurting my warlord. The only downside to Jortan, and I said this way back when I was playing Russ, was if he's in your deck and your opponent uses Jubak and they get your Jortan. That's a downside. That's about it. Otherwise, this guy is great. So good rare. Definitely worth having 2 of those in your deck. I don't like these guys. They've got Berserk. That doesn't do anything for me. They've got 4 health. That doesn't do anything for me. They've got Ward, and that is cool, but at 5 energy, Ward on a 4 health unit is still a risk, because you could still high roll with defensive satellites and wipe these guys out, and then what did you get from it? Nothing. Between the 5 energies, I would much rather have Jortan. Now, failing Jortan, you could go with Odin Command Squad. These guys have 5/5. They also have Drop Pod, and they have this cool ability to give Drop Pod to other starters you put in play. I just don't see how that works so well for the Space Wolves. In event decks, these guys can really help keep your board alive, but the speed that the game plays at right now, and the way that the game plays in general, just doesn't do much for these guys. You might see one of them at best, but usually they're just, or if they get generated from Wolf Spirit, right? You might see these guys if they get generated from Wolf Spirit, but you're not going to see too many people opt to include them, because why have a 5/5 giving a drop pod to Astartes that you don't, like, what does that do? It does nothing. It doesn't bolster their health. Kind of does. It's two health conditional, but it just, I don't see him. And I understand why I don't see him. I also understand why I don't see Deathsworn Pack. As much as this is brutal, destroy troops attacked. That's just it. Boom, hard removal. This card is a hard removal in itself. It's got 6 health, 5 attack. Great art. The fact that they don't have ward is problematic. And it's problematic not because every card in the Space Wolves should have ward, but at this level of energy within the faction, it becomes problematic, because especially for decks that have got a high percentage of ward troops, what that means, like I said, with the Oether decks, for instance, when you play that opponent who cannot do anything to your troops, you've played 3 or 4 ward troops down that they can't touch with any of their tactics. The minute you play a troop that does not have ward, all of those tactics are getting bumped into that guy. So he can have 6 health, but if your opponent has got 2 Seek and Destroys, as well as, like a Breach or something else, this guy's gone. Really, 2 Seek and Destroys is all it takes. But that's just where that's going to go. I'm going to throw everything I can, because guess what? He might be the only one that I can do that to. So that's really what deters people from playing him, I think. And I understand it. I get it. Dnase and Spear. This card is just a great card. It ups the attack of your warlord, and that stun is amazing. Whether that is offensive or defensive, if your opponent is attacking you, just sit back, let them stun themselves, buff up your health, buff up your defense, make it harder to hit, and then go for the killing blow. This is a great card. If you can get this out on 4 energy from like a war room or an abandoned supplies, you are going to be sitting in a solid position. Now, flip side of that, especially for Leman Russ, as I said, with Jortan, downside of that is if your opponent manages to copy that card either with a Remembrancer order or a Jubak, or even if they generate that card from something else, that's a problem, because most of the warlords that are aggressive, who are going to be running that card, don't want to face that card. Whoever gets Spear first in a Leman Russ mirror match is going to be the winner. That's just hands down. I can stun you. You will never be able to pack attack me. That's just it. That's game over. There might be an exception to that rule there, depending on whenever it gets triggered, like whatever cards they got in hand. But 9 times out of 10, that is the decision right there. Now, Dahmer Gunderson is This is the guy who I think is got some arguments with Halvdan Belli as far as number one legendary. 6 cost, beefy stats, 6/7 as he should be. He has ward. He gives ward to everybody else, and then he heals 3. I don't use the healing as much as I'd like to. I really want to. But that ward is, if your opponent does not have a flanking troop in hand to deal with Dahmer when he comes out, or they don't have, board clear, Conqueror, or Winnow the Weak, you are in a big position. And that's what he does. He offers that. He just, boom, here's your Wolf Priest, sit next to your Warlord. Your Warlord has ward. You have ward. Any other troops that you want to value have got ward. This guy is huge and can really just deter your opponents from continuing the game any further. Again, another, like, if you get this at 4 energy, just it's great. I don't see any reason why not to pick him up in the shop. He is definitely worth it. Varangi Veterans are a great common. They're worth it too. Speaking of flank, Varangi Veterans are the Space Wolves' answer to Dahmer Gunderson in the mirror match. And 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what your opponent ends up playing right after you play Gunderson. But you baited it out. These guys are solid 7 attack. They're going to be able to help deal with all the really nasty frontline stuff that can be thrown out there. If they survive, they are a threat in of themselves. If you bolster their health with Othar, guess what? They're a 7/7 with ward and flank. That's nasty. So I like these guys. I usually have at least 1, if not 2 of in a deck, depending on the cost range of where the deck is sitting at, but I don't ever regret having them. At the very least, you can put them down on the board if you don't have anything. Like if you're playing against an Angron, you play these at 6 energy. Angron has got to throw a couple tactics or a fast unit into them, or he's going to take some damage. He's going to take some wolves to the face. As far as Dreadnoughts go for the Space Wolves, this is one I pass on. He's got 9 attack on your turn. That's cool, but that's it. And there's other options at that energy curve. Even just this Wolfgard, who is not a vehicle, he's an Astartes, which is nice because then he's not vulnerable to like a Melt-A-Bomb or a Crack Grenade. He's got frontline and he's got heal 1. So his attack is 1 up, but he's going to consistently heal himself, which is nice. And he's got frontline, which is protecting your Warlord, whereas this card doesn't have any of that. Acer doesn't offer any sort of protection to your Warlord. So I actually like Mjolnir Wolfgard better. I also like Ragnarok better because I just rather destroy things. So as far as your 7 energy cost, for me personally, I usually put in Ragnarok. I've had a couple decks where I will squeeze in 1 Wolfgard just to have that front line bolstered. But usually I just have the Ragnarok, and then I utilize the Varangi or Skrin. Elfhooster Skrin, talking about another win condition. A lot of these win conditions as far as the mid-range go is I get this card out, it survives, I win. Getting Skrin up to 11, 13 attack, 15 attack is not difficult to do. He's got ward. He's got 8 health. This guy is brutal, and with cards like Supply Lines, which came out later, that's really a big strategy. That is a big strategy for the Space Wolves, especially ones that run the troop decks. Is get him out, play this first or second turn, and now you have got a Skrin that costs 6, and he's going to come out, and then who can respond to that? And if they don't respond to it, guess what? You can bolster the health, or you can pack attack, and now they've got to deal with your Warlord as well as Skrin. Yeah, this is a great epic. Not the number 1 epic. Again, I probably give that to Jortan Squad, but they are probably number 2. As a high cost, they should do what they do, and they do it well. Fenrisian Wolves is okay in the fact that they do the 2 flanking troops. I like what they do. That's not required. This isn't a required card. They put in they put in both the 4/5, that gives +1 for each damage unit that flanks, and they put in a 4/5 that stuns whatever it flanks attacks. That's cool. It's not necessary. It can be very beneficial for Lehman Russ. Having flank attacks is never a bad thing for him, flanking fast. So it works for him as a help for his win condition. But it not necessarily for the other warlords. At 8 energy, you could play that. You could play the not Forged Complex. You could play the The Forged Fane to give yourself 2 Voraks, which have Bloodthirst, but they have less attack, less health. So you have to decide if that's a good trade-off for you. You're not really going to use them too often on the board. Usually that's, again, to clear threat, lock the board, and then win the game at that point. If you don't pick this up as a legendary, you're not missing out on anything. Thuria Wolfgard is nice in event decks. Again, I don't see them often. Healing 1 to your Warlord can be very nice. But because of that cost, especially if you're doing a packed deck with Lehman Russ, you really want to have 3 to 4 cost troops in hand to maximize pack value. So it's really just kind of like if you're going for that build. Now, granted, if you played like a desperate defense Space Wolves deck and got those guys out, got Corpse Swan out, or got Skrin out, you could do some damage in addition to giving them ward or any of the like. That's not a bad strategy. There's also Pawn of Ymgr. This thing is just, I love the animation. I love the las cannon zaps. This is a cool card where it really shines in events. You get this out first and your opponent doesn't have any removal options, and you just like blast things. It's costly, but it's actually one of the few 9 to 10 cost vehicles that feels good to play for factions. Usually you get junky land raiders. That's not the case with the Space Wolves. Corpse Swan is debatable. Stat wise, it's crazy stats. 8-11. It's a 10 cost card. Again, with supply lines, you could get this out at 8, but it doesn't have ward, it doesn't have fast, it doesn't have flank, and it's got a very expensive ability on its next turn. Now, the ability is powerful, right? Draw a card. If it's a troop, put in play, give it fast. Give it fast. Give it fast. If it's a troop, it doesn't have to be in Astartes. I paid 3. I got Skrin. He has fast. I paid 3. I got Wolfgard. He has fast. I paid 3. I got Ferengi, who have flank already, but now they have fast. Boom. I attack with all 3 of those. I trigger pack a lot of times. And then I get to attack with the Corpse one. This is a win condition card, but it's so hard to pull off. It really is, because it sits there. Even though it has shield, it can, the hard removal gets thrown at it, because again, that might be the only deck in your card in your deck that doesn't have the ward restrictions, and your opponent's got all those tactics saved up. Or it really becomes like, okay, I got lucky, I drew it, and now what? And I got to get to 10 energy to play it. I would like to see it with Desperate Defense decks. I haven't seen Space Wolf Desperate Defense decks, and I think that's really because of the way their Warlords work and needing that early game advantage to build a board as opposed to a late board. But they really do have some late board options with Corpse Swan, Skrin, and Pawn of Ymgr. Not to mention, I'd say Wolfgard. I'd say Wolfgard is definitely worthwhile too. You get 2 of those. If you manage to get Corpse Swan and Skrin out with your Desperate Defense, and again, this is just 1 card, but you're playing that, your opponent will be able to probably get rid of Corpse Swan, but they won't be able to get rid of Skrin. And now he's got Frontline in addition to Ward. That's pretty powerful. I like that. I like that a lot. Now, looking at neutral cards, we should probably look at the counterattack here. A lot of people feel this is one of the best counterattacks out there. I disagree. It's a very good counterattack. Don't get me wrong. Healing 2 to a friendly unit. I did spoilers on this. I do think this is definitely one of the better counterattacks. I don't think it's the best, but healing 2 to a friendly unit in the Space Wolves faction, as we talked about, faction that wants to have high health troops, or troops with health that retain their status on the board, that's a very good card. Plus it heals your Warlord if you want to use that in a pinch. It's got good implications. It's good. Given the fact that most of the Warlords here, except for Giger, have medium initiative, you may or may not get that often. Giger's going to get it very few times, and honestly, Giger's probably the one who needs it the most as far as his vulnerability. But it's not bad. It's not bad. It's a good counterattack. Now, looking at cards that can bolster what we've seen, I think Kaizalane as a legendary is just going to be a good card across the board. But early game, really what he does is he gives you options. He's going to give you tactics. And Space Wolves, really mid to game, they can fall apart if they don't keep their troops on the board. So if you've got a unit that is giving you 2 or 3 cards, tactics to deal damage, to put out threats, to increase your warlord's viability, you're going to get a lot more out of him. I think he's very good for Space Wolves decks, even though he costs energy to play. To gain those tactics can have such long-term implications. I also think Angelic Presence, this is a new card, but this is a good card to have for Giger, a good card to have for Leman Russ. It's very cheap, so you can combo it with things. You're bolstering the health of your troops, which is fantastic, but if you don't have troops late game, you're still getting health to your Warlord, and that makes it really good. This is a really good card to have. It's an epic, worth picking up in the shop for a variety of decks, but it definitely helps out with the Space Wolves. Also helping out with these Space Wolves, we're not going to see Tank Warfare. Not for them. That's a new one, but we're not going to see that one. Orders from Terra. Now, that's tricky. That's tricky, but you can use Orders from Terra with Leman Russ and his pack and his Blood Claws, and that could be the game win condition right there. Is it necessary every time? No. I also personally think Edict of Censure. Now, I point out some good tactics that the Space Wolves have, but their builds, for the most part, are not tactic dependent. Thematically, it makes perfect sense that they would have the Edict, right? I don't think I have to explain why that is. But on top of that, they can play this and drop an opponent's tactic hand. The problem with Edict, is not just with it being legendary, is the fact that it's cost 5, which throws off the way for them to capitalize by dropping those 4 or 5 health troops or the 6 cost troops and then playing Edict to really double down on it. So there's a trade-off there. Do you play cards like Edict or Underground War to help eliminate the effectiveness of tactics, or do you just simply play a lot of ward troops and frustrate your opponent because their tactics don't do you any good? I don't think you're going to be wrong either which way. Arcology does wonders with Russ. It still does, even following the patch that I just recently received. You're getting troops out of it. If it's destroyed, you're getting more troops out of it. This is a good card for Leman Russ. This could be a good card for Bovi. No, I take that back. I take that back because the way Arcology generates the troops are never adjacent to Bovi, so all he would ever do would be bolstering Arcology's health, so I'm going to say no to that. I'm going to pass on Arcology for Bovi. I might give it to Othar, but I'd rather not. I think Leman Russ is the one who's going to be able to shine with that. We talked about Desperate Defense. I think that works for a lot of decks right now. I really do think that the Space Wolves have got some solid options for that if they're not doing supply lines. And then Mechanicum stuff. Now, Asteroid Sanctuary is a good one. That's an epic. I think Skitarii Protector is good because they don't, for the most part, the Space Wolves do not have stealth removal. They don't have a lot of stealth hate. They have ward, but they don't have a lot of ways to deal with stealth, so they're really going to rely on the neutral card pool to find ways to deal with stealth, either through Skitarii Protector or the Joker Company, which is in the Imperial Army, or Secretary Peltasts. And then when it comes to Chaos, Remembrance Order, it's a legendary, or not Remembrance Order, I'm sorry, Command Bridge. It's a legendary, but using this to early first turn search out the tactic that you want, whether it be your Dnase and Spear, whether it be a Emperor's Executioners, or your Fire and Ice, whatever it is that you're looking for, that's nice. It's cost 1, which means you're not losing anything on that. I also think Silent Death is big, depending on your deck, because this can buy Othar and Bovi time against other board decks. Against a Lucretia build, against a mirror match, whatever the case may be, your opponent can drop down a bunch of troops, but if you stun all of them, then they have a dead board. And then you can hopefully, on top of playing this card, play other cards and set up your turn to go from there. I wouldn't build a deck around it. I would have that as a one-of in a deck, but it's a very good card to have. Ekratrez, and I mention him quite a lot because he's just really good. He works really, really well with Othar, because Othar can use Othar's passive heals to Ekratrez. So you go Ekratrez giving Othar 3 health at the end of turn. Ekratrez goes back up to 3 health. If he survives, if your opponent can't get rid of him, you're going to get a lot of health out of him. On top of that, if Othar chose to buff his health up by +2, you have a 2/5 Eckertrez with Ward, who can survive a Joker company, and you're going to get good value out of that. It's a legendary card, but it's a good legendary card. I also like using Beast of Fire with Othar. It's a little contingent, but it's a dog, right? It's a wolf. Is it a beast? Is it a wolf? Is it a dog? Maybe it's a wolf dog. It's a dog wolf, but Othar can make it a 4/7 Bloodthirst with Ward. Yes, it has Maintenance 3, but you'll note that because it has Maintenance 3, if I put this out at 4 energy, at 5 energy, I still have 2 energy, which I can use Othar's ability on, meaning that this guy can still do 8 damage, if he hasn't already taken 4 damage to face from your opponent's stuff. The only downside to that is if I put him out right away and he gets stunned, then I have to spend my turn to bolster his health and give him Ward, which will ideally prevent more stunning for the future. But that's really it. That's a downside. Having a pumped up Beast of Fire, that's nice. And we talked about Drill Sight for the mechanic. Mechanic guard. Drill Sight is really crucial for Bovi. This is an epic. I wish I could point out some commons that work well. I don't know if there really are some new common cards that bolster that really bolster the brand of the Space Wolves. I think a lot of the new cards that are epics or rares or legendaries, those are the ones that are going to bolster, because a lot of the commons and even rares that the faction can shine with are its own cards. A lot of the neutral cards are icing on the cake. Our legendaries are really things that kick it up a notch. But I think the faction as a whole has a lot of its tools already within the pool. So if you're looking to get into a faction, it's not a bad one to get into. They have seen very few changes. And like I said, I feel like there could be changes coming at some point. But if we don't see them within 2 weeks, it may be 2 months or more before we do see them. I do feel like the faction as a whole, despite it being a mid-range faction, has suffered a little bit in regards to its speed. I think the Space Wolves are due. I think the Custodians and the Thousand Suns are due as well. And yeah, they play okay. Now, if you're looking to get into a faction, I think they're a decent faction to get into, as I mentioned, because a lot of their cards support themselves. But they're not a forgiving faction if they run out of cards. So if you're a diehard Space Wolves fan, you might find yourself frustrated as a new player. You might be better off playing a different faction, or at least waiting until you've got enough gold to just go in and buy a bunch of Space Wolf crates and get the most for your value. That's it for me, guys. I hope that's been beneficial. I hope that's shared some information and you find the video useful. If you do, subscribe if you haven't already. Try to do these card-by-card reboots, and then when I'm done with the card-by-card reboots, we'll be going back and touching up on some strategies and some training cage stuff, trying to catch up with the times, because some of these things get outdated as the game gets updated. And that is all I've got to say. So until next time, keep playing Legions, and we'll talk to you later.